All right, hello everyone. Let me pull up my slides. All right, welcome to this month's AAA meeting. Glad all y'all could come online and in person, get some pizza. It's always a good time. Before we get to Dr. Gragston, we're gonna have a few just like general updates and we'll move on. There we go. All right, upcoming events, we have Dr. Smisher from UTSI coming to talk to us in October, a little bit after fall break. And I'm sure many of you have met him. If not, he's a great resource. You can work for him. You can get general knowledge from him. You might even have him for a class. Really good guy to talk to. And in November, we have Dr. Jacuzzi, and he has 7 years experience with NASCAR, which is super cool. I don't know him super well. This is a contact that I was put in contact with through Dr. Coder, but he seems like a great person to talk to as well. Upcoming events, we've got a movie night, October 8th. The Martian won the poll, so that is what we're going to be watching. Hopefully you guys can make it. Industry trip, we're probably going to move the GE industry trip, which we should be able to be at GE, to the spring. No guaranteed dates there yet, but we are planning on that for the spring, and hopefully we can squeeze in a UTSI trip this fall, or like a day trip. The engineering expo has already passed. Hopefully you guys went to it, especially the job fair recently, the STEM job fair. Upcoming opportunities, again, this Rubicon Clear Constellation competition, no one's reached out to me yet, so I'm assuming there's a whole lot of interest, but leave it in there for now. And the STEM scholarship, just keep it on your radar. It's a really good scholarship that you should apply to when you can in January. And Brooke Owens Fellowship Program, another great opportunity, as well as the Matthew Isikowitz Fellowship Program. Let's get through this because we've went over it before. Chapter dues, $20 due by October. This is required to go on the industry trip and as well as the end of the year banquet. Hopefully we can do that and COVID doesn't screw something up somehow. But yeah, those are due by October. Hope the Venmo is we like Venmo a lot more. It's easier, but if you need to pay cash, send us a message and one of us will tell you where we are on campus. You can just come to us, give us some cash. National dues can help you pay for books, pay or get some scholarships, a lot of good opportunities, and it's good to show that you've been a member for a certain period of time. So it's always good to sign up for, not required to be in your club though. Merchandise, we have a poll set up. We just haven't sent it out yet. We have our proofs finalized and we are about to send that out. It's going to be same stuff as last year, and then the shirt, the t-shirt will be in the spring. But yeah, and we're selling the hat. There's enough interest, so the hat's going to be on there. Find us, general info for any new members. And we can go back to that later. And we have Dr. Gragston to come speak with us today. So let me switch over to his slides and we can get started there.
So CC, so you also have the ability to distribute.
Seen that before. I think it worked.
So you got to hit that enable editing. All right, I'll maximize my time. All right, so Dr. Gragston, it's me. Shelby knows me as probably her greatest. Probably freaking out right now. Also, I was sitting in the back of the room the entire time, and everyone thought I was a student, which is fine. That's typical. But anyway, I'm here because during the summer, Shelby was interning with us at well, she wasn't an intern. I don't want to give her the wrong title. She was a distinguished undergraduate hypersonic scholar, which we called the DUS. So during that time, she was talking about how some of the undergraduate students and like what went into applying to graduate school, what do you even do in graduate school, things like that. And so I put this together mainly just to kind of address that thing. And so hopefully it's a little bit, informative. If you have any questions, you can just interrupt me and I will totally ignore you. But yeah, you can just interrupt me. All right, so who's Gragston? I like to hike and stuff. I have some technical qualifications as well. Mainly I have a bunch of degrees in a bunch of different things. You guys mentioned John Smisher. I work with that guy. We both do hypersonic stuff. That's what I'm talking about right there. I have a hypersonic lecture tomorrow, actually, the 201 lecture class, whatever. That's me. Outside all that stuff, I but here at the university, I the only graduate courses because that's what we do at UTSI. But this spring, actually, I'll be teaching a course that I just created called Experimental High-Speed Aerodynamics. Someone can ask me about that later. I think the seniors would be interested in it. But yeah, just I do measurements. That's my thing. And I'm pretty active in AIAA on the national level. I'm a part of the Aerodynamic Measurement Technical Committee. And within that committee, I'm also the subcommittee leader. It's a lot of titles for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So that goes beyond the typical definitions of diversity and inclusion, but we're very much encouraging young people like yourselves to get involved with AIAA, and it's good to see pretty good attendance. So in talking about all this graduate school stuff, I want to start with the numbers because people say numbers don't lie. But do you really trust those people? That's a different thing. But sticking with mechanical because that's kind of what you think of when you think about aerospace engineering. Of course, you have some EEs and people doing like control systems and things. If we look at the number of bachelor degrees that were awarded in 2017 through 2018 in terms of the academic year, you can see there's a lot of MEs compared to Aero, which is fine because there's a lot more ME departments than there are Aero departments. But then if you start progressing through the level of degrees, you can see there's a pretty good drop off as you go into masters, and then even more substantial drop off as you go into doctorate programs. And so it's pretty rare for engineers actually to go into graduate school because honestly, we don't need everyone to go to graduate school, just like we don't need everyone to do engineering, right? There's all sorts of levels of engineering. There's all sorts of things that don't require these advanced training in terms of the academic training. But if you think about it in terms of population percentage, relative to the number of engineers that are getting bachelor degrees, only about 37% of the aerospace engineers went on to get a master's. Only about 10% went on to get a PhD. And for the MEs, pretty similar numbers, a little bit less for the master's, a little bit more for the, less, actually about half for the PhDs. And so hopefully this gives you some idea of the amount of people who pursue graduate education in these two fields. And all this data was taken from ASVE, by the way. So you can go look up. They have a lot of really interesting plots inside this data pool that speak to the amount of women getting degrees, the amount of underrepresented minorities. There's a lot of really interesting trends in there. Some of them not good. But the other thing, when you think about what happens afterwards, is employment. Obviously, all you guys want jobs. I want you to have a job too, so you can pay taxes, so I can write proposals and get funding to do what I want to do. That's important. But if we look at the growth all the way up to 2029, those numbers seem intimidating in the sense that there's only about 4% growth, 3% growth. But at the same time, that's actual growth. That's not how many people are going to need replacing. That's net growth. So that's actually pretty good. That's on par with all occupation. And at the same time, it's very well known that aerospace engineering has an aging workforce, and those people will be needing replacements soon in terms of productivity in the workforce. In terms of where people with aerospace engineering degrees work, this map is sort of color coded. By that, the darker shades represent more people. So if you don't like any of those places, change your major. I'm just kidding, but these states with white actually just didn't report any data. It's not that they don't have aerospace engineers. But notice Tennessee is pretty dark green, so pretty good number of aerospace engineers. Our neighbors below us, same Texas as you expect, a lot of engineers. At the same time, there's a caveat in this data, is not every aerospace engineer has the title aerospace engineer. And that kind of stuff wouldn't be picked up here, okay? So, but this is actually a pretty fair representation, in my opinion. And if we think of, in terms of salary, which is what a lot of people care about, I'm sure you guys all want nice cars, nice homes, cool iPhones. If you look at the bachelor's degree, compared to the graduate degrees they did, this came from Georgetown University. They actually did distinguish master's and PhD, which is upsetting to someone with PhD. But you basically expect higher salary. You get a graduate degree in either of these fields, mechanical or aerospace. It's generally true across essentially every major. But if you're thinking about graduate school in general, you're saying, okay, if I do a master's, and that's like 2 years of commitment, my friends, they're already making like 90, more money than me, blah, 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 that matters for some reason. That's not true, because there's a little more real easily. Think about it, the graduate degree, the master's degree actually pays off in just about 5 years on average. So hopefully these numbers kind of give you a snapshot of the workforce in aerospace engineering, some of the qualifications, where they work, things like that. Now, what I want to talk about for the rest of this is sort of like your personal reflection on whether or not you should go to graduate school, do you need graduate school, and things like that. So the best advice, and John Smisher actually said this, is for you to pick someone who works in the position that you want and find out what their credentials are and then replicate that. The only caveat I would add to that is they may not have taken the best path to get to that position. So find out what their credentials are, see if you can do that, get to that position quicker with better credentials, or be even better. And so that's what you should really think about if you're thinking about your employment after graduate school, or even if you need to go to graduate school. Some things to keep in mind in terms of your role as you extra qualifications. For example, I have a PhD. You're not going to find me doing stress analysis on like seat belts for 747, right? That's not my skill set. that actually would be pretty cool, but it's not my skill set. Everyone would hate my work. So I think for everyone to just kind of know what each of these levels of actually will contribute. So all engineers, no matter what sort of degree or specialization you have, all of you are basically going to be working in groups, okay? No one designs an airplane by themselves. That's just not a thing. One, the government would never allow it. Two, there's so many specialized things now. I can barely turn on my computer, but I can tell you all sorts of things about hypersonic flight. So just specialized knowledge. The idea of working in groups, no matter what kind of qualification you pick up. Now, if you think about classic engineering work, think about my example with the seatbelt doing stress analysis, or maybe you're doing some stress analysis on landing gear components. Again, that wouldn't be something someone with a PhD or graduate training would be doing. That's typically someone with a bachelor's degree. And that's not bad. That's interesting stuff still. It's very important. It's actually more important than what I do. Because, you know, if someone gets that wrong, then bad things happen. But with that kind of classic engineering work, that's what you're going to be doing if you have a bachelor's. And I'm not saying that's what you're always going to be doing. I'm just saying that's most likely what you're going to do. Okay. Now, if you think about leadership and we do a lot of stuff at UTSI with Lockheed Martin, and John and I have gone back and forth with like lecturing with them and stuff. Typically, those people have master's and doctoral degrees. Okay, and so if you're thinking about management, that means you need to lead people who likely have bachelor's degrees. You're looking for extra qualifications that distinguish you and give you that ability to understand projects and leadership. And that one's actually very much similar to this doing research and development. Okay, because if you're doing research and development, typically you have some sort of project manager role, and those are going to be filled by people with masters and PhDs. And if you're doing research, you're generally supposed to be an expert, and that's kind of a skill you pick up when you're doing a PhD. That's actually what a PhD is for. So you typically don't see people with bachelor's degrees doing those roles in terms of research. So you may be important to research. For example, Shelby knows Kirk. He's our tunnel engineer at UTSI. He designs, if I want a model built, he will design the model. He will do the stress analysis on the model. He will, he'll even machine the model. He'll get the model machined. But he does not actually contribute to the science or analyzing the data. And as far as he knows, he produces this thing. I put it in the tunnel, do a bunch of measurements, and he doesn't know what the outcome or anything is. That's the outcome and all that kind of stuff. That's the master PhD people. They do that kind of analysis and figure out where it fits in the greater picture. Leading research, it's a PhD, just because, again, the PhD is a research degree. It basically gives you the qualifications to say, you know your field very well, and that you're capable of expanding your knowledge. And that's what you really want if you're going to be a research leader. Kind of talked about this. So we'll just skip over that one. Innovation, engineers can't stop you from innovating. You do that all the time. If you're like me and you're 6 years old and you're tired of making your bed, and so you get like a broomstick, a crazy pulley contraption to make your bed for you. You call that your science program. That doesn't matter what kind of degree. You just innovate. Your promotion and earnings. We talked about that a little bit with the previous slide. Typically, if you have a graduate degree, even over a longer period of time, you're going to make a lot more money. Typically, in bachelor's. This was also important in work-life balance. Typically, bachelor's, master's, your job ends when you go home, unless you're a project manager. If you have a PhD, because you're definitely going to be in some sort of management role, your job will almost never end. If you're a professor, your job will not end because people say, hey, why don't you give a lecture at 6 o'clock? And so work-life balance is something that actually should be taken into account. But there are people who do this very well with PhDs. Okay, so what is graduate study? Well, we all know there's kind of two options, right? There's the master's and the PhD, the ones I've been talking about. But within the master's itself, when we're thinking about the US, by the way, it's a little bit different in some countries. There's a couple different ways to get a master's degree. So there's a coursework only option. And so that's exactly like your undergrad. You take courses, and at the end of the day, you get to walk and get your degree. Nothing wrong with doing that. But it's, like I said, it's very much like your undergraduate study. There's a project option at some universities. I think UT does this as well. Where basically you take a bunch of courses. Typically, it's less than the 30 or 36. You take like one, write like a really extensive research paper. For example, a young man just did this at UTSI. He was actually working at ADC. He was an engineer in the ARC tunnels, and he wrote a research paper on various aspects of ARC tunnel design, but in really high detail. So this one's a little bit weird. The thesis option is the classic master's degree, where you're going to take 8 extra courses on your degree, and you're going to do a research project. Okay, and so that's the classic, like, you're learning extra skills, and you're also starting to specialize, but you're getting familiar with the research process, and so that's giving you the potential to like lead research or be at least tangential to research and development industry. You'll have to take the 6 research credits, typically just called thesis hours. It's like the easiest thing in the world. You just say, yeah, I'm working on my thesis. No one checks you or anything. You get an easy A on your transcript. You don't turn anything. 6 easy classes. 6 easy credits, really. As far as picking which one of these, you should really think about where you are in life or what your next goal is. So if you're working full-time, I do not recommend you do a thesis. That would not be a good idea. Actually, the only exception is the military, active duty. I have a lot of friends who have done being active duty. They've all done great work. But the strains of having to do research, if you're an experimentalist like me, for example, you need to be there to do your experiment. You need time. It takes a lot of effort to set something up. And so that can be difficult if you're working full time. But if you're not working full time, this is actually a fantastic option, because if you do this option, you're more likely to get these benefits of being a GRA or a GRA. So what happens with a GRA is, for example, right now I have a contract with the Air Force Research Lab at Eglin Air Force Base, and we're working on these certain things related to ramjets. I'm trying to parse my words here. And so, because of that, when I wrote that money, they gave me like $200,000 to do this, and I put in money for a student, a very good student, and she's been working on this project, and I pay her to do this, and I pay her tuition, her health insurance. I do not pay her fees. She never asked me, my defense. So if you do research, generally get all these benefits. You're going there for free, and the pay varies based on state. At UTSI, I want to say we're up to about $26K per year. For example, I had a friend who went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and I think he was at $16K. So it varies with cost of living, a bunch of other things, but generally you will get all those nice benefits. So think about which one is more appropriate. If you're working full-time, I think the coursework or project option would probably be the best way. That brings us to the other thing, which is a long, grueling process that has nothing to do with how intelligent you are, just how much you can withstand pain. And that's typically about 4 years after a bachelor's degree. I did mine. I'm weird, I guess. So I did 2 master's degrees, and then I came in and did this PhD in 3 years. But notice it's like after the bachelor's degree. If you have like a master's degree, it shortens it. This thing is weird because you do all the things you do for a master's. So there's all that stuff already. Plus you take some additional courses. I see that right here. So master's degree plus 12 credit hours. But you have to do all this random stuff. It's like a qualifying exam, which sounds horrible. Like, can you imagine sitting down in a room with 3 professors? You get to pick, by the way. And they just grill you, like while you stand in front of fundamentals of fluid dynamics. I love it now as a professor, but it can be intimidating. But it's actually pretty straightforward, and typically people do fail, and it's not like they fail and then you just give them the boot. Like you fail, then you say, "All right, you did really well in these areas. We're going to do this again in about another semester," and so you get multiple chances to pass that. But it's really important because you get a pay bump after you do it, and then you also get the continuous. If for some reason you never do pass, what'll happen is you basically just leave with your master's. So you don't really lose that much. It's pretty rare for someone to fail several times, but it does happen. So along with that, you also have to do a dissertation. So what's the difference between dissertation? Basically, a dissertation is like a thesis times 3. Okay. So with a master's degree, there's no requirement to do anything. Do something and understand research in terms of a thesis. With a PhD, you have to do something new. There's this like little drawing of like a circle, and then like a little bit of the circle being expanded after you zoom in by like times 100. And that's what you're doing. You're slightly expanding human knowledge. And sometimes it's a really trivial thing. So it sounds intimidating to do that. Like, how do you come up with something new if you don't know everything? It's actually pretty easy. For example, this summer, Shelby was working on, we'll do what you actually work on. She was working on this measurement technique and applying it to shockwave boundary layer interactions in a Mach 2 tunnel. That measurement technique is very well known. Shockwave boundary layer interactions are pretty well known, but no one has ever used that technique to measure shockwave boundary layer interactions, and that was actually pretty new. So that would be like, for example, if it had all worked out and we had gotten a bunch of like extra detail, that could have been 1 chapter of a dissertation. So think about that times 3. And so it's actually pretty easy to come up with new things. Okay, so that's all the like formal stuff for a PhD. So notice I said it can go up to 7 years. Typically, if it goes up to 7 years, as a professor, I blame the student. But it's actually pretty fair because that's one of the big things between undergrad and graduate school is there's going to be a point in your PhD, typically about halfway through your 3rd year, or maybe even earlier. And then your whole point after that, you're still getting paid and all that stuff. It's just doing research. And it's kind of weird because some people still have the vibe of like, I'm a student, I can just do things casually. But at that point, your timeline in graduate school is determined purely by your desire to finish your research and get out of there. So if you're like me and you're extra motivated and you are a workaholic, that was easy. But something you got to think about. Then you have all these other sort of informal requirements that I'll talk about in a minute. Onto you. And so, for example, these would be what I require my students write conference papers. You're going to have to go to conferences and talk about your work in front of like world-class experts. and you're going to stand up and defend it. When your conference papers, you're participating. And like, for example, I go to all the AIAA conferences in my field. That's a good chance to do that. Put your name out there. You have to write journal papers. I require at least 2. If you're an overachiever like me, I wrote 10 out of my graduate work. So and those kind of things. So every professor has their own expectations, but almost everyone will require at least a journal paper. Oh yeah, and you get paid more than those master's students. So you get bragging rights. So with graduate school, what do you need to apply? You need this thing called the GRE, which I don't even need anymore. It's basically like the ACT. In fact, on a mathematical level, it is exactly like the ACT. As an engineer, you wouldn't even need to study the math. But it has a verbal section, an analytical reasoning section, and a writing section. You have to take all those. I recommend at least practicing the writing. You need a GPA above 3.0. That's sort of the minimum thing. Obviously, if you get applications, people with higher GPAs, things like that, but the graduate school establishes a minimum. This isn't just UTK, by the way. This is like general things for most people. You need letters of recommendations, typically faculty that you've taken classes with, things like that. So you should be really nice to your professors and bring them gifts. You're going to need a letter basically explaining why you want to go to graduate school, what you hope to accomplish, etc. I'm going to be honest with you. We only kind of glance. They are important if we're like really close between a couple people. But you should definitely write one of those. You're going to need transcripts, as usual, and then you have to pay this application fee, like somewhere between 50 to 80 bucks, depending on where you're applying. But sometimes you can just get it waived, so you don't have to pay anything. But if you're interested in a particular graduate school, check out their website for their things. And if you want a GRA position, which is or GTA thing, there are deadlines, but almost all universities, including UT, will admit you at any point up until the start of the semester. That's called rolling admissions, but you may not be guaranteed to get one of those GRA or GTA slots. Yeah, in terms of applying schools, I recommend finding 9 schools, being ambitious, and then you'll realize that's pretty typical. So, actual things to consider in graduate school. These are just some of the questions that I came up with. So, first off, does the university have the program? If they don't, why are you applying there? So that's pretty straightforward. The other thing is, in undergrad, you don't really look at the faculty when you picked your undergrad university. If you do that, you need to do that in graduate school. It's because your dependence on the faculty is much, much higher. And so every graduate student will have an advisor, not like you do now. But this advisor will pay you to do the research, you get to use their equipment, you're learning from them, and your name probably, especially if you do a PhD, your name will be attached to your advisor. So, for example, people still walk up to me and say, hey, you were all law student. Yes, I was. What you can do about it. But anyway, that's a real thing, still happens all the time. I've had people, like my advisor's advisor is a really famous person in our field. And so people like program managers will just walk up to, not walk up to me, but talking with them. Like, oh yeah, you came out of the blah, blah, Richard Miles tree. And I'm like, sure, because that matters. But that kind of stuff is important. And it'll also help you get a job. So definitely look at the faculty, make sure they're doing research related to what you actually care about. And then you think about yourself, your living situation. Like, do you want to live in Tuscaloosa? No. But just think about things like that. If you're doing PhD, you're going to be there for a while. If you're doing master's, it's still 2 years. Unfortunately, Hawaii doesn't really have that. Otherwise, you know, I would have gone there. But think about those things. And then definitely think about whether or not they're going to pay you. The rule of thumb is don't go there if they're going to pay you. I mean, if they're not going to pay you, definitely go there if they're going to pay you. Because basically, if one school will not pay you, there's definitely another school that will pay you. And that's especially true in aerospace because there's sort of this workforce shortage right now, especially in my field of like high speed, hypersonics and things like that. Think about the cost of living versus how much you're paid. What is your value of the degree? Everyone knows UT. You know, think about, you know, the brand of the university itself. Don't so much focus on rankings. That doesn't mean as much as you think. In all honesty, in terms of degree, your school rankings and things. For example, the only difference between you guys and say like Princeton is when you go somewhere, there may be like a couple of people in Princeton that just get together and be like, oh, you went to Princeton? I went to Princeton too. And then they just go out and have a beer. That's about it. There are actually quite a bit of balls in aerospace, and so you'll meet a lot of people who just know University of Tennessee, think about that kind of stuff. Again, think about faculty. Are they taking students? For example, just because someone says, I want to work with you, Dr. Gragston, I don't always just go like, awesome, cool, I'll pay you. Maybe I don't have funding. So think about this kind of thing. And the only way you can answer that is asking the faculty member. I'm not very intimidating. So you can send me an email, I will ignore it. If you send 5 more, I might answer. Or call you a stalker. Think about the coursework. Not that important, but you know, if you want to learn about hypersonics, for example, and there's no hypersonics course, how are you going to learn about hypersonics? Your faculty will help you get a job. Your advisor will help you get a job after you're done. So do they have a good record of that? Go look at their recent students who graduated, it's listed on our website. I put their LinkedIn's on there. You can go see where they're working. Like, do that if you can for other universities that you're interested in. Then actually talk to the graduate students. If you pay them money or give them pizza, they will love you. But ask them kind of like, what's the experience like? Does the advisor actually show up to work and things like that? For example, Shelby was me, and I basically always show up to work. But I'm also like, you know, running around doing a bunch of other things. So you need to find an advisor that fits things. Another good thing, if you want a hard metric to look at instead of a ranking or something, is if you go on Wikipedia and you look at what's called the endowment for a university, take that number and divide it by the number of students at that university. You want to maximize that number. Because what that does is that's telling you basically how much money the school can invest in research. All right, so that's, for example, UTSI, billion wind tunnels. That's because we have a big endowment. So state schools typically have pretty big endowments. So what am I looking for? Basically, I want you to be a genius. You know, just small expectations. Every faculty member, no, we don't always expect you. We're not expecting everyone to be a genius. But the things we are looking for are you likely to complete the program? It's extremely common, especially among American students, that they don't finish some of these programs. There's going to be a point, and everyone goes through this when you're doing your graduate degree, when you say, wow, I could just totally, or my friend Bob just bought a BMW. I could totally go work at this job and buy a BMW. And then I would be like, what do you want to do? It's very likely because if you don't, it really annoys us because then we have to find another student. We're actually graded on how many students we graduate faculty. Are you planning to do research, and do you have qualifications that say you can accomplish these things, or that you're likely to succeed in research? So that could be things like undergrad research experience, internships, things like that. You can convey that kind of stuff with an essay after write on intent. Do your research interests match? For example, I do hypersonics. If you want to do control systems, why are you talking to me? I don't do control systems, although I do think they're interesting. You want to do a PhD or a master's degree? Basically, PhDs tend to get preferences for acceptance. That's a bad practice, in my opinion, but it's not the faculty's fault. For example, I'm not graded on undergraduate students I graduate, but I'm not. So it's not the faculty's fault that they're always looking for PhD students, but it is something some schools will take into account. As aerospace engineers, I wouldn't worry about that too much. You guys are in big hands, you know, like someone wanting to do a master's degree is extremely good in terms of faculty. How many of you turned down other colleges? Yeah, everybody. If you do that again, you'll probably you don't actually have to go to any of them. You're weird. Basically, we also look for something that tells us you're reliable and responsible. Again, I'm not always going to be over my student's shoulder saying, turn that bolt 90 degrees. I'm making sure everything's being done. The idea is that people naturally try to run on your timeline, but that also matches a project timeline. So hopefully those are a couple good insights that help you understand what we're thinking about when we're looking at applications. And again, this whole process is a lot different from undergrad. I've never seen an undergraduate application, but I have reviewed graduate applications. That's because graduate applications go to the faculty. About who we want. Undergrad goes to the admissions office, and we never see it. So it's very much you communicating with faculty when you're applying. So almost done. So sorry talking so long. Here's more information about me. Here's a couple things I recommend you do. You have to research on schools that interest you, look at the websites for each of the faculty. That's like one of the big things that we do in research, right? Is we write our results and give them out to the community. If they haven't written a paper in 2008, I don't want to work with you because you probably won't get published. They may not be pressing writing papers, which again, you need that for your PhD. So think about those kind of things. Google Scholars really I wouldn't really trust the research. Frankly, you're pretty bad about updating those, but Google Scholar is a good thing, or AIAA's archive. Contact graduate students, contact faculty you're interested in. Again, they will eventually respond to you. Start your applications now if you haven't already. And if you're younger, get involved in undergrad research. Because again, that's going to demonstrate you're interested in research. For example, I did research the entire time I was an undergrad. And I learned a lot of skills that helped me in graduate school. So thank you for your time. Sorry I took so much of it. But if you like my voice, this is recorded apparently, so you can listen to it while you sleep. Or you can just hear me tomorrow when I talk about hypersonics. So thank you. Questions?
I have a question.
Huh?
So, how would I do this?
They would. No, the Air Force would say GRA pay, we're going to pay you way more than that.
And they'll basically, you won't get a GRA or GTA. The Air Force will just write the university a check covering all of your expenses, and you would continue to get an Air Force salary at some level. So, yeah. So if you're weird like me and you obsess on basically everything, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, so I was always looking at graduate schools, even my freshman year. But that's not most people. Honestly, the moment you think you're interested in graduate school, start browsing a little bit. Start getting an idea of what schools are good schools for your field. For example, again, hypersonics, you think about Texas A&M, Caltech, Purdue, Maryland. But then you think about control systems, you think about Georgia Tech, and some other schools. Again, I'm not a control person. Texas A&M. So each field has its own schools associated with actually doing good work in those fields. So it's your job to figure that out. Faculty will help you though. So ask questions to faculty. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to be honest with you. Even when I read applications, I don't pay attention to the GRE. I just assume the graduate school will filter. Actually, so that's the thing, is I wish I could show you our graduate application thing, but it's actually illegal. But there are actually all these crazy filtering options. And obviously we have the ability to use those or not. But honestly, your math, if you're in engineering, should be pretty high. Thinking about in terms of percentile, at least 70 percentile. And then your verbal scores don't really care too much. Your writing we will look at in the sense that you do a lot of writing when you do research. So a good place to go look up that stuff is some schools will actually say it on their website, graduate admissions. Another place is this place called Grad Cafe. I think it's .com or .org, can't remember. But that's actually a cool site because anytime someone gets accepted, they just go post what their stats are and when they got their acceptance letter and that kind of stuff. And so it's really good for people applying, say like, I can expect a decision on this day and this person, I have similar stats. So hopefully that helps. Any other questions? Yes. What? Can't ask two questions at once. In terms of hypersonics, you have really with anything in aerospace, you have two routes. You've got some sort of theoretical version, which for fluid dynamics is CFD, it's like numerical stuff. Or you have an experimental thing where you're designing things and you're doing actual tests. For hypersonics, it's really CFD. In that case, you may be sitting there writing code on some very specific configuration. For example, Ethan, I can't remember his last name, Jim Coder's student, Vogel, that's his name. He was studying this cone that it's like a cone everywhere but flat on the top. So it's chopped cone is what we call it. And that model came out of, I think, Sandia National Labs when they wanted to generalize the space shuttle, for example. And so he's looking at turbulent features and all sorts of other interesting things on this very basic model, which will then be extrapolated into like an actual flight vehicle or something like that. And so on the CFD side, you'd be doing that, or you'd be developing new CFD solver or new tools. On the experimental side, you're going to get in the tunnel and you're going to measure things. If you're like me, specialized in measuring things without touching them. And so we do that with light, for example. And so it really depends on what your field is in aerodynamics. What was your other question? I'm just messing up. Yeah, so if you're, for example, if you're doing control systems, or not something I'm talking about, let's talk about guidance and navigation and stuff. You may be testing in hypersonics. The big problem is actually getting that signal through all that hot gas, which is a very big attenuator, radio waves, or microwaves. And so you may be setting up something where you're testing how well a signal goes through various types of material, especially engineered materials, or you may be engineering that material. So outside of fluid dynamics, it varies a lot. What else?
So you mentioned research. How do you determine like that? Do I want to do research or not? Because I feel like as undergrads, we don't think what this graduate looks like.
Yeah.
Even if you're doing undergraduate research, it's kind of a low one on that skill.
Yeah. So participating in undergraduate research, you're typically going to be at least in proximity to higher level research around you. And you can kind of see what those people are doing, what those like postdocs or graduate students are doing, and get a good feel for what your day-to-day life as a graduate student will be like if you do exactly that thing. The other thing you can do is just talk to faculty and say like, hey, kind of what is research-based graduate school like in your field? What is non-research? How does that differ if I just go get a coursework or do a project? And so you can just talk to faculty about that kind of stuff. So, but remember, faculty seem like really, I don't know, ghostish, I guess, use the modern lingo. But it's just because being a faculty member, you're kind of like a CEO of a startup that never moves beyond startup, because you're always asking for money. Your best employees are guaranteed to leave you. And so they're always running around pulling your hair out. So just be persistent, but definitely ask them. What else? Over already? Okay, well, those people will email you the slides, and this was recorded apparently. You're welcome.
Thank you again for speaking for us, and thank you all for coming. That's the end of the meeting. Y'all can leave whenever you want, or stick around and talk. If you want a one-on-one question, if you don't like asking questions in front of crowds, go ahead and ask him. I'm sure he doesn't bite too hard. And bye everyone on Zoom.